Okay, we are going to be talking about memory, and I'm going to provide some commentary on the slides that I normally give in class. So here we go. We'll start with the nature of memory and then proceed through some of the other topics. Okay. First thing to make note of is that memory is defined in this way, an internal record of some prior experience. That's kind of obvious. I think we know that. The second point is really important, and it states that memory is a reconstructive process. In other words, we don't just simply play back what we've watched and experienced, we reconstruct it, and that has important implications, as you'll see as we go on. The rule of threes. And I'll just read these and we'll refer to them in more detail a little later. 3 processes of memory. We have to encode, store, and then retrieve what we want to remember. There are 3 stages that memories go through, beginning with the sensory, into short-term, and into long-term, which is where we put things that we need to get back later. And then in the long-term memory store, there are 3 distinctions made among long-term memories: semantic, episodic, and procedural. Okay, so let's look at this 3-stage memory model, and this is kind of the basis for what I talk about in class for the most part. It's one of the most influential models for conceptualizing memory. It's certainly not the only one, but as I say, it's influential. There's been a lot of research done on it, and I'll just kind of go through the this chart with you. We start with the environment, so we have something that we're paying attention to. It enters into this first storage called the sensory memory storage, and notice the characteristics here. Holds the information for a short period of time. The duration may be a fraction of a second for things we're looking at, and a little longer for things that we've heard, but still very short, a matter of a couple of seconds or so, and then it's gone. As you can see here, it's forgotten, unless we make some sense out of it. That is to say, we encode it and we put it into the second stage of memory, which is the short-term memory store. And the short-term memory store is a little longer in terms of duration, up to maybe 20-30 seconds, something like that. The capacity, though, is much more limited. In sensory memory, the capacity is extremely large. In other words, when people talk about photographic memory, what they're really talking about is that sensory memory store. So it gets an awful lot, but it can only stay in sensory memory, as we've seen, for a very short period of time, unless it's passed into short-term memory. And if it is passed into short-term memory, there are some further complications, because look at here, capacity is very limited. Only about 7 things, roughly, 7 different things that we can keep in short-term memory, and they only stay there for 20 or 30 seconds unless we repeat them. That is to say, we use maintenance rehearsal. And you can see up here, maintenance rehearsal refers to just simply repeating something over and over, and that will recycle it and allow it to stay in short-term memory longer. And again, if we don't do something to the short-term memory to pass it into long-term memory, at the very bottom here, we see that short-term memory is lost. So let's say it is something that's important, psychological concept we want to remember because we know we'll be tested on it, let's say. So we do make sense of that concept, and we encode it. That is to say, we make sense of it and give it some meaning, and we put it into long-term memory. And as we'll see, the way we put it into long-term memory is extremely important. Notice this arrow up here that says elaborative rehearsal. What that refers to is the idea that we have a much better chance of getting a long-term memory back later when we want it if, when we've put it into long-term memory in the first place, we've elaborated, we've given it some meaning that makes sense to us. We've applied the concept we're trying to learn in a way that resonates with our own experience. So, for example, classical conditioning is kind of abstract, but if I apply it to an emotional reaction that I've had and then label the unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response and so on, I have a better chance of remembering those sorts of terms and what they mean when I want to get them back later. So a lot of it has to do with this encoding and elaborative rehearsal mechanism. Now at the bottom here we see that the purpose, of course, is long-term memory storage. The duration, relatively permanent. I mean, it may be that once you get something in long-term memory, it is there essentially forever. And it's just a matter of kind of locating it, finding it, and retrieving it out of long-term memory. The capacity also is very, very large, relatively unlimited. So we don't have to worry about cluttering up long-term memory. Well, cluttering up maybe. That is to say, if we don't organize long-term memories carefully, they do get sort of lost, just like we might have an attic. If we just sort of throw things in them, then a couple years later we're trying to find something. We know it's there, but we can't find it because we didn't organize it particularly well to begin with, and we really can't, we don't have any way of remembering precisely where it was placed. So that elaborative rehearsal and encoding process and storing it and organization and all those sorts of things are critically important in long-term memory.